The black Maybach glided through Seoul's midnight streets like a shadow made of steel and money. Ji-hwan loosened his collar as his driver navigated the final turn toward the mansion, the kind of sprawling estate that whispered old money and newer blood. He'd left the quarterly meeting early, something he never did, because an instinct he couldn't name had been clawing at his chest all evening. The house loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a single light glowing in the east wing. Larissa's wing. The wing he'd forbidden himself from entering for 3 years. Ji-hwan stepped out into the December cold, his breath forming clouds in the air. His tailored black blazer caught the wind, and the intricate tattoos crawling up his neck felt like they were tightening around his throat. He moved toward the side entrance, his hand instinctively checking the gun at his waist, a reflex from years of survival. Then he heard it. A sound so quiet, so broken, it stopped him mid-step like a bullet he never saw coming. Crying, raw, muffled sobbing seeping through the marble walls of his own home. Ji-hwan's jaw clenched. In 3 years of their arrangement, he'd never heard her make a sound. Not a laugh, not a complaint. Not even a whisper of protest when he'd handed her that contract and told her exactly what their marriage would be: a business transaction. Protection in exchange for silence. Distance in exchange for safety. He pressed his palm flat against the cold marble partition separating the two wings, his head bowed, eyes closed. On the other side, he could picture her, Larissa Daniels, the woman he'd married in a courthouse with no flowers and no promises, the woman whose room he'd never entered, whose voice he barely remembered. The sobs grew heavier and something inside him cracked. This wasn't supposed to happen. He didn't do emotion. He didn't break his own rules. His empire was built on ice-cold calculations and airtight control. But standing there in the golden light of his side of the mansion, listening to his wife weep in the blue shadows of hers, Ji-hwan realized something terrifying. He'd spent 3 years protecting her from his world, but he'd never asked who was protecting her from his house. His hand curled into a fist against the wall. Tomorrow, he would find out why she was crying. Tomorrow, he would break every rule he'd set for himself. But tonight, for the first time in his carefully constructed life, Ji-hwan stayed, and he listened. Because the most dangerous man in Seoul had just discovered his greatest weakness. A woman in an emerald green nightgown, kneeling alone in the dark, praying for a salvation he didn't know she needed. And when morning came, someone was going to pay for making her cry. Hello, my beautiful souls, and welcome back to Hidden Love Stories, where broken hearts find their way back to beating. Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge how heavy this season can feel for so many of us, and wish you strength, warmth, and the kind of love that shows up when you need it most. Now, take a deep breath with me, because today's story is about a man who built walls so high, he forgot the woman trapped on the other side. And the moment everything came crashing down. Trust me, this is one you'll want to stay with until the very end. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The marble was colder than Ji-hwan expected. Or maybe his hand had just been pressed against it for too long. He didn't know anymore. Time had become strange since that sound. Her sound had cracked through the silence of his carefully ordered world. 3 years, 1,095 days of this arrangement, and he'd never once heard Larissa cry. Ji-hwan pulled his hand back slowly, flexing his fingers. The tattoos on his knuckles seemed darker in the golden light of his wing, serpents and symbols of debts paid in blood, all the way up to his jawline where a dragon's tail curved just below his ear. His father had told him once that a man's face was his fortune. Ji-hwan had covered his in ink anyway, a deliberate middle finger to tradition, a declaration that he would run the syndicate his own way. But this he hadn't planned for. He moved away from the wall, pacing the length of his bedroom like a caged animal. His jacket came off first, then his tie, both discarded on the leather armchair by the window. Outside, Seoul glittered like broken glass, beautiful and sharp and completely indifferent to the turmoil churning in his chest. When had he last seen her? Really seen her? Not just passed her in the hallway with a nod so slight it could have been a muscle twitch? 2 months ago? 3? They lived in the same house but existed in different dimensions. 2 strangers bound by a contract that had seemed so practical when his attorney drew it up. Marital protection without marital complications, the lawyer had said, sliding the papers across the mahogany desk. She gets your name, your security, your financial support. You get a wife on paper, which makes you look stable to the old guard. Everyone wins. Ji Huan had signed without hesitation. Larissa had signed with a hand that trembled just once before steadying. He should have noticed that tremor. The crying had stopped now, but the silence felt worse somehow. Heavy, suffocating. Ji Huan grabbed his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the one he needed. Mrs. Kang, the head housekeeper, a woman who'd worked for his family since before he was born, who knew every secret these walls had ever held. The call connected on the second ring. "Sir?" Her voice was careful, alert despite the late hour. "Larissa." He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Has something happened?" A pause. Too long. When Mrs. Kang finally spoke, her words were measured. "What do you mean, sir?" "Don't play games with me." Ji Huan's voice dropped to that dangerous frequency that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "I heard her crying. Why was she crying?" Another pause. Then quietly, "Perhaps you should ask her yourself." "I'm asking you." "With respect, Mr. Choi, I think there are some conversations that shouldn't happen through intermediaries." Mrs. Kang's tone remained neutral, but there was steel underneath. "Not after 3 years." Ji Huan hung up. His hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. She was right, and he hated it. He hated that a woman who'd folded his socks and pressed his shirts for 30 years could make him feel like a scolded child with nothing but carefully chosen words and strategic silence. He moved to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. From here, he could just barely see the edge of the east wing, Larissa's territory. A single light still glowed behind gauzy curtains. Was she still awake? Still crying? Still dealing with whatever had broken her down so completely that the sound of it had traveled through marble and wood and 3 years of deliberate distance? Sleep didn't come. Ji Huan watched the sky fade from black to deep purple, to the bruised gray of early morning. Somewhere around 5 a.m. he showered, dressed in a fresh suit, charcoal this time, with a black shirt underneath, and made his way downstairs. The mansion was already alive with quiet activity. Staff members moved through the halls like ghosts, their footsteps muffled on expensive rugs, their voices kept to whispers. They all nodded as he passed, eyes downcast, respectful, afraid. Good. Fear kept people loyal. Fear kept them in line. Except it didn't, did it? Because someone, somewhere in this house, had given his wife a reason to cry. Ji Huan found Mrs. Kang in the kitchen, overseeing breakfast preparations with the focused intensity of a general planning a campaign. She looked up when he entered, her weathered face betraying nothing. "Coffee, sir?" "Information." He leaned against the marble counter, arms crossed. "Now." Mrs. Kang dismissed the other staff with a subtle gesture. When they were alone, she poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one toward him. "You want to know about Mrs. Choi?" "I want to know why she was crying. Then you'll need to understand what her days look like." Mrs. Kang added sugar to her cup, stirring slowly. "She wakes at 6. Breakfast in her room, always alone. By 7:30, she's in the garden if the weather permits, or the library if it doesn't. She reads, she paints sometimes. Watercolors, mostly landscapes." Ji Huan said nothing, just waited. "Lunch is at noon, also alone, unless—" Mrs. Kang paused, and something flickered across her face. "Unless certain members of your organization happen to be visiting." Every muscle in Ji Huan's body went taut. "Which members?" "Mr. Park, Mr. Song, sometimes Mr. Lim." She met his eyes directly now. "They've taken an interest in Mrs. Choi's welfare." The coffee cup in Ji Huan's hand should have shattered from the pressure of his grip. Park, Song, and Lim. 3 of his underbosses. 3 men who ran the southern operations and had been pushing for more autonomy, more territory, more power. 3 men who should have known better than to go anywhere near his wife. "Define interest." Mrs. Kang's voice remained steady, but her eyes held something that looked like carefully controlled anger. They speak to her, ask her questions about her day, her family back in Nigeria. They're very friendly, very concerned. And? And 3 months ago, she stopped painting. 2 months ago, she stopped going to the garden. Last month, I found her crying in the pantry at 2 in the afternoon, but she wouldn't tell me why. Mrs. Kang set her cup down with deliberate precision. Yesterday, Mr. Park was here for lunch. After he left, I heard the sobbing you must have heard last night. Ji-hwan was already moving toward the door when Mrs. Kang's voice stopped him. Sir, whatever you're planning. I'm not planning anything. His voice was ice over razors. I'm going to observe. Observe? My wife's day. I want to see exactly what kind of interest my men have been showing her. Mrs. Kang nodded slowly. Then you should know she usually walks to the market on Thursdays. She likes to pick out fresh flowers for her room. She leaves around 10. Ji-hwan checked his watch. 7:15. He had time. One more thing, Mrs. Kang said as he reached the doorway. She doesn't know I've told you any of this. If you're going to shadow her, be invisible. The moment she knows you're watching, she'll retreat even further than she already has. I've been invisible for 3 years. I'm very good at it. The words tasted bitter coming out. By 9:45, Ji-hwan was in his personal vehicle, not the Maybach, but a black SUV with tinted windows that could blend into Seoul traffic like water into water. He'd parked 3 houses down from the mansion with a clear view of the front gate. At precisely 10 o'clock, the gate opened and Larissa emerged. Ji-hwan hadn't seen her in daylight for weeks, maybe longer. The sight of her now, walking alone down the tree-lined street, made something twist in his chest. She wore a long camel coat over dark jeans and a cream sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple style that showed the elegant line of her neck. She carried a woven basket over one arm, moving with a grace that seemed at odds with the tension he could see in her shoulders even from this distance. She looked beautiful, isolated, unbearably alone. Ji-hwan waited until she turned the corner before starting the engine. He followed at a distance, keeping at least 2 cars between them, using every tactic he'd learned from years of surveillance work. Larissa walked with purpose, but without hurry, stopping once to let an elderly woman pass, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The market was a sprawling affair of covered stalls and open-air vendors, the kind of place where old Seoul met new money in a chaotic collision of kimchi and designer handbags. Larissa moved through it with practiced ease, stopping at the flower vendor first, an older man who greeted her like an old friend, already pulling out stems of white chrysanthemums before she even asked. Ji-hwan watched from behind a fruit stand, partially obscured by a display of winter oranges. She smiled at the vendor, a real smile this time, and paid for the flowers before tucking them carefully into her basket. Then her phone rang. Ji-hwan saw her entire body tense. She pulled the phone from her pocket, looked at the screen, and for a moment he thought she might just drop it. Her hand actually trembled, that same tremor he'd seen 3 years ago when she signed their contract. She answered. "Hello, Mr. Park." Her voice was quiet, controlled, terrified. Ji-hwan moved closer, using the crowd as cover. He couldn't hear Park's side of the conversation, but he could see what it was doing to Larissa. The way her free hand clenched into a fist at her side, the way she glanced around as if checking whether anyone was watching, the way her eyes went bright with unshed tears. I don't have it yet," she was saying. "I need more time, please, just—" She stopped, listened. Her face went pale. No, please don't do that, I'll get it. I promise. Just don't—" Another pause. Yes, I understand. Tomorrow. I'll have it tomorrow. She ended the call and just stood there in the middle of the market, surrounded by life and noise and color, looking like someone had just sentenced her to death. Ji-hwan felt something dark and violent unfurl in his chest. This wasn't concern. This wasn't friendly interest. This was extortion. This was predation. This was a violation of every code he'd built his empire on. Larissa moved mechanically through the rest of the market, buying vegetables she barely looked at, accepting change she didn't count. Ji-hwan followed, cataloging every detail, every tremor, every moment of barely suppressed panic. When she finally turned toward home, he let her go. He had everything he needed, almost everything. He made a call from the SUV, bypassing 6 layers of security to reach his head of intelligence directly. I need phone records, Park Sang-min, every call, every text, every contact for the last 3 months. Sir, he's one of our own. Did I stutter? No, sir, I'll have them within the hour. Make it 30 minutes. The records came through in 25. Ji-hwan sat in his home office, the door locked, reading through page after page of evidence that made his blood run colder with each line. Park hadn't just been calling Larissa. He'd been coordinating with Song and Lim. They'd been working together, systematically isolating her, making demands. Money, 50 million won. With threats against her family in Lagos if she didn't comply. Her family. The family Ji-hwan had never asked about. The family he'd never protected because he'd been so focused on protecting her from his world that he'd never considered his world might come from inside his own house. The truly damning evidence came in the form of text messages. Park to Song. The Nigerian wife is perfect leverage. He doesn't care about her anyway. Song to Lim. She'll pay. She's already terrified. This is easier than I thought. Lim to Park. When do we escalate? Ji-hwan's vision went red at the edges. He set the phone down very carefully, his hands shaking not with fear, but with a rage so pure it felt like ice in his veins. They thought he didn't care. They thought his silence meant indifference. They thought the woman crying on the other side of that wall was just another piece on the board, expendable and forgotten. They were going to learn exactly how wrong they were. But first, he needed to talk to Larissa. At midnight, always midnight, when the house settled into its deepest silence, Ji-hwan stood outside the East Wing for the first time in 3 years. The door wasn't locked. He'd never locked it. The separation had always been voluntary, a line drawn in mutual agreement. He was about to cross it. The door opened soundlessly. Inside, Larissa's wing was a different world. Softer colors, warmer lights, touches of personality he'd never allowed himself to notice. Watercolor paintings lined the hallway, landscapes of places he didn't recognize. Nigeria, maybe, or dreams of somewhere else entirely. Her bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Ji-hwan moved toward it, his footsteps silent on the carpet, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with danger, and everything to do with the woman on the other side of that door. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, in that emerald green silk nightgown, her head in her hands. She wasn't crying now, but the evidence of tears stained her cheeks. Ji-hwan knocked softly on the doorframe. Larissa's head snapped up, her eyes going wide with shock. Ji-hwan! His name on her lips was startling. How long had it been since she'd said it? We need to talk. She stood quickly, wrapping her arms around herself. It's late. I don't think... They've been extorting you. He said it flatly, watching her face. Park, Song, and Lim. 50 million won and threats against your family in Lagos if you don't pay. The color drained from her face. How long? He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. How long have they been doing this? Larissa backed away until she hit the wall, the same wall he'd pressed his hand against last night. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Since when? The words burst out of her, sharp with 3 years of suppressed pain. Since when do I matter to you? We have an arrangement, Ji-hwan. A contract. I'm not supposed to matter. He took another step closer. The contract was meant to protect you. Protect me? She laughed, a broken sound that hurt to hear. From who? From them? They're your men. They work for you. They knew you wouldn't care if they... She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. If they what? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. Ji-hwan closed the distance between them, gently pulling her hand away from her mouth. Larissa, if they what? If they hurt me, she whispered. They said you wouldn't care because I was just a name on paper, just a convenience, just... Her voice broke entirely. Every word was a knife twisting in his chest. He'd done this. Not directly, but through his silence, his distance, his ironclad refusal to let anyone believe this marriage was real. He'd created a vacuum where predators could thrive. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it with every cell in his body. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't ask. I'm sorry I made you believe you were alone. She looked up at him, searching his face as if seeing him for the first time. Why do you care now? Because I heard you crying through that wall, and it broke something in me I didn't know could break. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Because I've spent 3 years being the most disciplined man in Seoul, and it turns out discipline is worthless if it means I can't protect the one person who should have been safe in my house. What are you going to do? I'm going to end this. His voice hardened. But first, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Larissa studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. Tell me about your family. Why are they threatening them? She took a shaky breath. My brother, my youngest brother, he's sick. He needs surgery. They found out somehow, and they said if I didn't pay them, they'd make sure he never got the treatment. They'd make sure my family never felt safe again. Ji-hwan's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. Your brother's going to get his surgery. I'll handle it personally. Ji-hwan. And tomorrow, you're going to do exactly what Park told you to do. You're going to agree to meet him, to give him the money. He cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. But you're not going alone. I'll be watching. And when he shows his hand, I'm going to cut it off. That's dangerous. No. His smile was cold. What's dangerous is thinking they can threaten you and walk away. What's dangerous is assuming I'll play by rules I never agreed to. What's dangerous is forgetting who I am when the people I care about are threatened. You care about me? The question was small, uncertain. Ji-hwan leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers, the same gesture from opposite sides of the wall, except now there was nothing between them but breath and truth. I'm about to burn down 1/3 of my organization for you. What do you think? The next morning, Ji-hwan sat in his office reviewing security footage with the detached precision of a surgeon examining an X-ray. On the screens before him, Larissa moved through her routine: breakfast in her room, a walk through the garden she'd abandoned months ago, a phone call that made her shoulders sag with defeat. To anyone watching, he looked exactly as he always did: cold, controlled, utterly unaffected. Inside, he was calculating the exact amount of pain each trader would experience before he was done with them. His phone buzzed. A message from Park. Winter Gala tonight. Your presence is expected. Perfect. Ji-hwan had forgotten about the annual syndicate event, a black tie affair where Seoul's criminal elite gathered under the pretense of charity and culture. Every major player would be there, every underboss, every lieutenant, all of them dressed in designer suits, pretending they didn't have blood on their hands. It was the ideal stage for what he had planned. He typed back, I'll be there, with my wife. The 3 dots indicating Park was typing appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, of course, we look forward to seeing Mrs. Choi. Ji-hwan's smile was razor sharp. I bet you do. He found Larissa in the library, curled into a window seat with a book she wasn't reading. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the question in her eyes before she asked it. It's happening tonight, he said, settling into the chair across from her. The Winter Gala. Every major member of the organization will be there. And you want me to come? It wasn't a question. I need you to come. I need them to see you with me. I need them to understand exactly how wrong they've been about what you mean to me. Larissa set the book aside, her fingers tracing patterns on the leather cover. Ji-hwan, if you do this publicly, if you choose me over them, it could split the organization. It could start a war. Then let it start. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I built this empire from nothing. I can burn it to the ground and build it again if that's what it takes. But I will not tolerate anyone threatening you. Not my men, not my rivals. No one. Why? The question was soft, almost fragile. 3 years, Ji-hwan. 3 years of silence and separate wings and pretending we were strangers. What changed? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face, the curve of her cheek, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength she'd shown by surviving months of systematic terror without breaking completely. When had he stopped seeing her as just a signature on a contract and started seeing her as This? I heard you crying, he said finally. And I realized that I'd spent 3 years protecting you from a world you were never in danger from, while the real threat was sleeping under my own roof, eating at my own table. I realized that every rule I'd made to keep you safe had actually made you vulnerable. And I realized... He paused, the words difficult in a way that violence never was. I realized that somewhere in those 3 years of silence, you'd become the most important thing in my life, and I'd been too disciplined to notice. Larissa's eyes glistened with tears, but she blinked them back. I need to tell you something about why I was crying that night. The extortion, it wasn't just about the money. She stood, moving to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. 3 months ago, I overheard your staff talking. About you. About how you'd been getting sick more often, how you'd been tired, how the doctors couldn't figure out why. Ji-Hwan frowned. It was true that he'd been feeling off lately, persistent headaches, unexplained fatigue, but he'd attributed it to stress. What does that have to do with... I started paying attention to your food, your coffee, and I noticed Park always insisted on personally delivering your afternoon tea. She turned to face him, her expression grave. So I had it tested. Ji-Hwan, they've been poisoning you. Small doses, slow acting, designed to look like natural illness. The room went very, very still. How long have you known? 2 months. And when I confronted Park about it, when I told him I'd go to you if he didn't stop... Her voice cracked. That's when they started threatening my family. They said if I told you, if I tried to save you, they'd kill my brother. They said I had to choose between your life and his. Ji-Hwan stood slowly, every movement controlled, because if he let go of that control for even a second, he would tear this house apart with his bare hands. You've been carrying this alone for 2 months. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let you die, but I couldn't sacrifice my family. So I prayed. Every night I prayed for a solution that wouldn't cost me everything. She laughed bitterly. And then you heard me, and I thought maybe prayers actually work. He crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with a desperation he didn't bother to hide. She stiffened for just a moment before melting against him, her fingers clutching the back of his jacket. You were trying to save me, he murmured into her hair, while I thought I was saving you. We're both terrible at this. Catastrophically bad. He pulled back just enough to look at her. But we're going to fix it, tonight, at the gala. I'm going to end this, and then we're going to start over, properly this time. How? Trust me. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft and reverent. Just trust me. The winter gala was held at the Shilla Hotel, in a ballroom that dripped with crystal chandeliers and old money. Ji-Hwan arrived fashionably late, Larissa on his arm in a gown the color of midnight. Elegant, understated, and absolutely devastating. He'd sent it to her room that afternoon with a note. Let them see you. Every head turned when they entered. Ji-Hwan felt the ripple of shock move through the crowd like a physical thing. In 3 years, he'd never brought Larissa to a syndicate event, never acknowledged her in public beyond the bare minimum required by propriety. And now, here he was, his hand possessively at the small of her back, his attention focused entirely on her as if the rest of the room didn't exist. Park was the first to approach, his smile too wide, his eyes calculating. Mr. Choi, Mrs. Choi, what a lovely surprise. Is it? Ji-Hwan's tone was pleasant, almost friendly. I thought it was time my wife met my colleagues properly. She's been too isolated. Of course. We've been concerned about her, actually. She always seems so... alone. Park's gaze slid to Larissa. I hope you've been well, Mrs. Choi. Larissa's fingers tightened imperceptibly on Ji-Hwan's arm, but her voice was steady. Much better now, thank you. Song and Lim materialized from the crowd, drinks in hand, expressions carefully neutral. Ji-Hwan watched them with the focus of a predator sizing up prey. They thought they were safe here, surrounded by witnesses, protected by the illusion of civility. They were wrong. Gentlemen, Ji-Hwan said smoothly, I was hoping to speak with you all tonight. Why don't we use the private lounge upstairs? I have some business to discuss. Park's smile faltered. Now? Perhaps after... Now. It wasn't a request. The private lounge was a smaller room overlooking the ballroom, soundproofed and secure. Ji-hwan had used it before for sensitive negotiations. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. He gestured for Larissa to sit, then turned to face the three men who'd filed in behind him. Song closed the door. Lim poured himself a drink, trying to appear relaxed. Park stood with his hands in his pockets, waiting. I want to thank you, Ji-hwan began, his tone conversational, for your concern regarding my wife. Park exchanged glances with the others. Of course, we only want what's best for... Let me finish. Ji-hwan's voice dropped to that dangerous frequency. Your concern has been very thorough. Phone calls, threats, financial demands. You've really gone above and beyond. The room went cold. Song set his drink down carefully. Lim's hand moved toward his jacket, toward the gun Ji-hwan knew he carried, but stopped when he saw Ji-hwan's expression. I don't know what you think you know, Park said slowly, but I know everything. Ji-hwan pulled out his phone, tapping the screen. A recording began to play, Park's voice, clear as crystal. She'll pay, or her family pays. The boss doesn't care about her anyway. Park's face went white. I also know about the poison, Ji-hwan continued, pocketing the phone. The slow-acting toxin you've been putting in my tea for months? Very creative. Almost worked, too, if my wife hadn't been paying closer attention than I was. This is ridiculous, Song started. Is it? Ji-hwan pulled out a second phone, this one containing every text message, every financial transaction, every piece of evidence his intelligence team had compiled in the last 24 hours. Because I have bank records showing transfers to offshore accounts. I have laboratory reports confirming arsenic in my blood work, and I have testimony from 6 staff members who watched you threaten my wife in my own home. Lim made a move toward the door. He didn't make it 3 steps before Ji-hwan had him against the wall, forearm across his throat. You're not leaving, Ji-hwan said quietly. None of you are. You can't do this, Park hissed. We're executive board members. You remove us, the whole Southern operation falls apart. You need us. I built this organization from nothing. I don't need anyone. Ji-hwan released Lim, letting him collapse to the floor, gasping. But you made a critical error in judgment. You thought my silence meant I didn't care. You thought my distance meant she was unprotected. You thought you could hurt her, and I would choose the business over her. He turned to Larissa, extending his hand. She took it, standing to join him. You were wrong, Ji-hwan said, his arm sliding around her waist. About all of it. Park's expression twisted with rage. You'd destroy everything for her? A nobody? A foreign wife you married for appearances? Yes. Ji-hwan's answer was simple, absolute. Without hesitation. Then you're a fool. Perhaps, but I'm a fool who's still in power while you... Ji-hwan nodded toward the door. It opened to reveal 4 armed security personnel. Are finished. What happened next was efficient and brutal. Security escorted the 3 men out through a private exit where vehicles were waiting. They wouldn't be killed. Ji-hwan wasn't wasteful with talent when it could be repurposed, but they would be stripped of power, wealth, and position. Exiled to the organization's most remote operations, where they would spend the rest of their lives as cautionary tales. By the time Ji-hwan and Larissa returned to the ballroom, word had already spread. The looks they received now were different. Fearful, respectful, careful. Everyone understood the message. Mrs. Choi was not just a wife in name. She was protected, valued, untouchable. Ji-hwan led Larissa onto the dance floor, one hand at her waist, the other clasping her fingers. They moved together in silence for several moments before she spoke. What happens now? Now? He pulled her closer. Now we go home, and tomorrow we burn the contract. Burn it? I don't want a business arrangement anymore, Larissa. I want a marriage. A real one, with you. She looked up at him, searching his face. And if I say no? Then I'll spend however long it takes convincing you that I'm worth a second chance. He smiled, and it was genuine this time, warm in a way his smiles rarely were. But I should warn you, I'm very persistent when I want something. I've noticed. Her lips curved into a small smile. Okay. Okay? Let's burn the contract. Let's start over. She pressed closer, her head resting against his shoulder. Let's stop living in separate wings like strangers. Jihuan's arms tightened around her. I'm going to make you so happy you'll forget these 3 years ever happened. I don't want to forget them. Her voice was soft but firm. They brought us here. They taught us what matters. And what's that? That silence can be the most dangerous thing in a marriage, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is break your own rules. 3 days later, Jihuan stood in the mansion's courtyard with a metal fire pit and a folder containing their original marriage contract. Larissa stood beside him in jeans and one of his sweaters, her hair loose around her shoulders. Ready? He asked. She nodded. He dropped the contract into the pit and lit a match. They watched together as the papers caught fire, curling and blackening, 3 years of careful legal distance turning to ash. So what now? Larissa asked as the last ember died. Do we need a new contract? No contracts. Jihuan pulled her close, tucking her under his arm. Just us. Just this. No rules? One rule. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. No more silence. No more separate wings. No more pretending we're anything less than what we are. And what are we? Jihuan kissed her, soft and deep and full of promise. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. We're the couple who almost destroyed themselves trying to stay safe, and then saved each other by being honest. He smiled. We're catastrophically bad at this, but we're going to figure it out together. Larissa laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her, bright and unguarded. Together sounds good. That night, the wall between their wings might as well have not existed. They fell asleep in Jihuan's bed, wrapped around each other, the silence between them no longer oppressive but peaceful, companionable, right. And when morning came, the mansion was different, lighter, alive with possibility. Mrs. Kang found them in the kitchen making breakfast. Or rather, Jihuan was attempting to make breakfast while Larissa supervised with barely suppressed amusement. The housekeeper stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene, and allowed herself a small smile. Will Mrs. Choi be needing her wing anymore? She asked. Jihuan looked at Larissa. Larissa looked at Jihuan. No, they said in unison. Very well, I'll have her things moved. Mrs. Kang paused. If I may say so, sir, it's about time. After she left, Larissa turned to Jihuan with raised eyebrows. Did our housekeeper just scold you? She's been doing that since I was 7. I've learned to accept it. Good. Larissa kissed his cheek, because I plan to do it too. Jihuan caught her waist, pulling her back against him. I'm counting on it. Outside, Seoul continued its endless motion. Millions of people living millions of stories, most of them completely ordinary. But inside the mansion that had been silent for 3 years, 2 people who'd almost destroyed each other through distance had finally found their way to the same side of the wall. And in the space where cold marble had once divided them, there was now warmth, laughter, and the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Love. Real, messy, hard-won, and absolutely worth the fight. The wall between them was gone, and in its place was everything they'd been too afraid to reach for. Until now. So there you have it, my beautiful souls. A man who broke every rule he'd built his life on. A woman who found her voice in the darkest silence. And a love that proved sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary. If this story touched your heart, if you felt Jihuan's desperation or Larissa's courage, hit that subscribe button. Because we're just getting started with stories that prove love is worth burning the world down for. And comment below, where are you watching from? I want to say hello and know that our stories are reaching you, wherever you are in the world. Until next time, remember, the walls we build to protect ourselves can become the very prisons that destroy us. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is tear them down. This is Hidden Love Stories, where broken hearts find their way back to beating. I'll see you in the next one.